What's going on YouTube? It's Tej back again with another video. Today, I'm giving you my 2022 NFL Big Board 1.0. You can expect to see this pretty much updated once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks, somewhere thereabout. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at my top 40 prospects. And it stands right now, it's very early in the process, so this will be very fluid. And, as we go along and do more of these, I'll probably branch it out to 60, 80, maybe get up to 100, but that 60 to 80 range might be where I cap it out. But hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. And if you do, hit that like button. It really would help me out a ton. If you're new to the channel, want more football and draft content in your life, just hit that big red subscribe button. And comment your thoughts on this big board down below. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Where am I crazy? Love to have your thoughts. I'll respond to every comment. So let's talk about this big board down in the comment section. One last note, I have to make note of this. I do weigh position value into this relatively heavily, especially with quarterbacks. Like, I think Carson Strong might be a little high compared to where most people have him, but I do weigh the value of a quarterback into the equation. But with that said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Number one, Thibodeaux. I think he's more in the line of Bradley Chubb, top 5 type of edge rusher than, Myles Garrett and Von Miller. I've said that before, but to me, him and Stingley Jr., the most surefire, easy bets to make in this draft. Like, I think Thibodeaux, if he were to say get drafted by the Texans with the number 1 pick or the Jags after a bad week 1, he would be an instant impact guy. And I think he's better suited for a 4-3 right now, but you add some bulk, you could play some 3-4 outside linebacker. No matter what, I think this guy is an explosive edge waiting to make the leap to the NFL, and he looked great against Fresno State first week of college football. Stingley Jr. is going to be playing some wide receiver this year for LSU. Must-see TV there, but great freshman year. Not an awesome sophomore year, but it wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. Great athlete. He'll run in the 4.3s. Awesome size. Special teams value if you need it. This guy's a stud in the making. One of the best cornerbacks I've seen since I got into scouting heavily. Spencer Rattler comes in at 3. And when I was mocking this up, I thought for sure he would be 1. But we've seen some erratic nature. His turnover-worthy rate, kind of leaning on a PFF stat there, is still pretty high. They haven't all resulted in turnovers, obviously, but there's still that erratic nature where he plays like Mahomes, but he doesn't quite have the reserve and the cautious ability to take a step back like Mahomes does. But that said, Spencer Rattler could be a guy who, if he ends up in the right situation next April, maybe it's the Giants, maybe it's the Eagles. We'll see how Jalen Hurts turns out, where he could just be big plays waiting to happen. So definitely a guy who's worthy being the top 3. And this top 6 to me are all blue chip guys. Like, I feel confident about these top 6. Number 4, Kyle Hamilton. I'm a Notre Dame fan, so I am blessed with watching this man. He is unbelievable. If you watch the Florida State Notre Dame game, you know what this guy could do. He is a Derwin James type of safety, where Brian Kelly has said if any defensive coordinator at the NFL level doesn't take him because they don't know what to do with him, they don't deserve to have that job, because he's that good at so many different things. He may not be like Derwin James level of good of like man coverage, but as a deep free safety, he's a playmaking machine. And he also has some nickel versatility because he is such a good tackler and he can be a hard hitter. Smart football player on top of that. Great size, 6'4". I mean, he just does things that you should not see safeties do. Evan Neal, number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freak list. This guy's played both tackle positions down at Alabama and guard. So wherever he's going, let's say the Bengals took him, they could line him up at 4 of the 5 offensive line spots. And shoot, he's probably good enough to play center. That's just not a valuable enough position to take advantage of his talent. But Neal looks like the best offensive tackle in football right now, or college football that is. And he's a monster athlete with guard tackle versatility. Blue chip, no doubt about it. And then DeMarvin Leal. He's really interesting because I think of him as a D tackle, but Texas A&M's playing him on the edge, and now it's interesting you compare that situation with Chris Jones with the Chiefs, where he's being flexed out and he's playing pretty good on the edge as well. So different body types being moved out towards the edge is a really interesting case study that I'm going to keep my eye on throughout the rest of this year. But to me, DeMarvin Leal, D tackle, DN, if you're running a 4-3, I'd put him on the interior, the D tackle spot. 3-4, he could play some 3-4 DN. But hey, kick him out to the edge depending on your personnel. Like, if you're in a nickel package, which is becoming more and more the base defense for NFL teams, I could see a spot where he's successful both as a D end and on the interior. So it kind of comes down to whatever your personnel is. So that flexibility is huge. And again, that's what puts him into this top 6 blue chip category for me. A little bit of a step down. Sam Howell, you see some of the throws he makes against Austin Peay, and you're like, yes, that is NFL caliber talent on its own. Now, granted, Austin Peay is not a good Division I program, but the arm talent, there is some very good throws on Howell's reel in regards to his accuracy and his touch. He is a smart guy. He is a leader, and I think that's a very underrated quality to Sam Howell. He is a guy who wants to be the head of the pack, and that is something I admire at least. But there's still some things he needs to work out, and throughout the rest of college football season, I need to see him play better in big games, right? Didn't look good against Virginia Tech week 1. Part of that, he's still gaining chemistry with a brand new core of pass catchers and running backs, and the offensive line didn't look great in that game. Virginia Tech kind of veteran on the defensive side, so not really a great matchup there for the Tar Heels. But as time progresses, can Sam Howell have big games against big opponents? If so, then he might move into that blue chip category. Might make it instead of the top 6, the top 7. Also knocking on that door is Kaiir Elam. What a start to his season with Florida. On top of that, 6'2", almost 200 pounds. Fantastic athlete. I'm a huge Kaiir Elam fan, and that's crazy to say that he's not a blue chip CB1 guy, because you put him in just about any other draft, Kaiir Elam is the top guy. Like, maybe even last year, like him and Surtain probably, and then eventually J.C. Horn got in that mix, and he was the first corner off the board. But Elam might have been top corner if you take where he's at now and put him in last year's draft. It's insane. This guy is that good, and maybe he should be in that blue chip category, but I think he's a CB1 in the making. Kenyan Green, a lot of the same I talked about with Evan Neal. He's got guard tackle flexibility, plays at a Power 5 conference, and so far has gotten out to a good start to this college football season for the Aggies. So really excited to see what he can do moving forward. Then Chris Alave, the first wide receiver here. I'm a big Chris Alave fan, and I know a lot of people want Garrett Wilson to be wide receiver 1, and I'm obviously inclined to change my mind as the year goes on. I think Alave is just smoother. It just comes more natural to him, while Wilson has the height and a little bit more speed over Alave. Alave is a big play, downfield weapon, and he's a crisp route runner, and I loved what I got to see from him watching his film, preparing for the 2021 NFL draft. And maybe that's part of my bias. I've just seen more of Alave because I was expecting him to be in that draft class, and I was prepping for him to be a first-round pick in that draft. But now goes back to Ohio State. So maybe I'm just a little bit further along. I know a little bit more about Alave versus Wilson, but I mean, this guy is a deep threat that I cannot wait to see. One, hopefully some better QB play from Ohio State, but if he goes to an NFL team where, I in my mock draft had him going to the Patriots, him and Mac Jones, that could be deadly. On to number 11. This is his Ohio State teammate. These two guys are going to be pretty much linked next to each other throughout this early draft process. Garrett Wilson has what Alave doesn't in the sense of, again, height. He's 6'3". He'll be a little bit faster when it comes to his 40 time, and going to be a little bit better in jump ball situations, but I think Alave is just a little bit more refined as a route runner. The hands maybe a touch better for Alave as well. So these two guys obviously neck and neck. A lot of people have Wilson at wide receiver 1, and I really can't argue against that. I think I'm just a little bit more biased towards Alave and the big plays he can make, and I'm just a little bit further along in that process for him versus Wilson. Jackson Kirkland, one of my favorite players to watch, and he's been one of the few players for watching that hasn't been a train wreck. That's a welcome sign. He was great in 4 games in a short COVID year, went back to Washington, and has just doubled down in his efforts and basically solidified in a lot of ways that he's going to be a first-round tackle. I've enjoyed watching him play a ton. Aidan Hutchinson, another one of those Freaks List members for Bruce Feldman. This guy's an animal, and he has been fantastic so far early on for Michigan. And he's starting to climb up, in my eyes, to becoming the clear-cut edge 2 behind Kayvon Thibodeaux. And there's definitely some guys we'll talk about here in a little bit that are not too far behind, and their play picks up. Hutchinson cools down, it can change. But right now, Hutchinson, edge number 2 for me. Trep Mcduffie, you're going to catch on a theme here. This is a loaded cornerback class, and I'm a fan of a ton of those corners. I'm also have to state this. I love watching wide receiver and specifically cornerback film. Those are 2 positions I just love. The hands, the footwork, the football IQ that goes in all those. Obviously not anything I played, but the more and more I learn about the game and the more I watch film, those are 2 positions I just love watching. Safety in there as well. So I'm a little bit biased towards corners for sure, but Trent McDuffie, not quite as big as Kaiir Elam. He's about 5'11", but when it comes to physical tools and talent outside of his height, it's there for Trent McDuffie. He'll run a good 40, and he is as polished as it gets. And Washington has a good track record producing these corners coming off of week 1 of the NFL season. Byron Murphy looked great. A little bit different of a player, but McDuffie comes from a good pipeline there. Tyler Linderbaum, it's pretty impressive to see an interior offensive lineman at 15 because, again, I am weighing positional value into these rankings. Linderbaum's just that good. I mean, this is a plug-and-play starter once he gets to the NFL. More than likely it's center, but I could see him potentially moving over to guard. He's freakishly strong. I mean, there's stories of him and Tristan Wirfs getting in wrestling matches and Linderbaum winning. I mean, Wirfs was not only the best offensive tackle last year, but he's one of the strongest to come out of that 2019 draft class. And Linderbaum is getting the best of them, and the stories go that he was stronger than Wirfs. I mean, that's incredible. On top of that, polished player, smart guy, and you need someone like that who's cerebral at that center spot, making offensive line shifts, adjustments, things of that nature. So Linderbaum definitely right now a top 15 player in my eyes. Adam Anderson, not a huge sample size to pull from, but man, the talent is there. This guy just looks like an edge, and I'll say that for a few other edges a little bit later on, but Adam Anderson looks like a guy who belongs to the NFL. Freaky quick off the line. His explosiveness is maybe the best in the class from what I've seen early on. Guy's an animal. Does need to get a little bit bigger, a little bit better against the run, but man, when it comes to being a pass rusher, this could be a plug-and-play, ready-to-go guy at the NFL just because of how good he is already in that realm. Number 17, Malik Willis. I'm actually going to be going out to a Liberty game this year, so I'm going to get to see Malik Willis in person. Obviously, doesn't have a crazy hard schedule, at least early on in the college football season, but unreal arm strength. The accuracy has looked fine. He's been throwing to wide open, wide receivers, so it's good that he's hitting people he should. And then obviously an phenomenal athlete with his legs. So that combination of big arm plus athleticism naturally going to be intriguing to NFL fans and NFL teams alike. Plus, it helps, Hugh Freeze has had his problems, obviously, in the past, but a guy who has a pretty modern offense and carries some name gravitas with him, so that will also carry some attention towards Malik Willis, the former Auburn Tiger. That also helps his resume as well. But I've liked what I've seen early on from Willis, and obviously the upside is there, and that's really what you're banking on. You make a deep dime pass against Campbell, it's like, whatever, for a guy who should go in the first round of the NFL draft. It's about what he could grow into. And as the year goes on, we'll be able to see that he's a better passer this year versus last. That's going to take some more time to fully see. But obviously, Malik Willis, freak talent for sure. Andrew Booth Jr., another cornerback, and another guy who's going to run a good 40. He's as polished as it gets. Plays in a Power 5 conference. You're going to hear a lot of corners on this list. I mean, it's an absolutely loaded class. And Andrew Booth Jr., I've seen people have him as high as cornerback too. So me having him at CB4 may feel like I'm disrespecting him, but I'm telling you, between Kaiir Elam, Trep Mcduffie, Andrew Booth Jr., all three guys after I have Derek Stingley listed at CB1, there are going to be plenty of happy NFL teams getting future CB1s in the mid to late first round, especially teams like Pittsburgh, who need a cornerback of the future. New England could use a cornerback of the future. The San Francisco 49ers, the Green Bay Packers, just to name a few teams that are obviously likely to be in the cornerback market a year from now once we get to the next offseason, I should say. So a lot of happy NFL teams next draft cycle. George Karloftis, not quite the athlete that Aidan Hutchinson is, but just a guy who does not give up on a play, has very good hands, and just naturally a brute of a human being. Very, very strong. So I think Karloftis, and I think he could work in a 4-3-3-4, which also bodes well for him, but especially if you just put his hand in the dirt, made him a pass rusher in a 4-3, man, I would just love to see George Karloftis just go toe-to-toe with some of these left tackles in the NFL. Power versus power, it would be a good showing, but Karloftis also a strong start this year for Purdue. Christian Harris, I mean, he plays a position at a program that just breeds NFL linebackers, so that is obviously a good pat on his resume. Also, great size, fantastic athlete. And like we talked about some of the linebackers in the past for Alabama, I mean, CJ Mosley kind of comes to mind. He's an okay athlete. But Dylan Moses from a year ago, largely because of an injury, kind of took away his athletic edge. That's not the case with Christian Harris. This guy will be all over the field, great in the run game, so obviously worthy of being a top 20 mention. Probably a guy who, especially if Alabama gets into big games, plays in the college football playoff, he could make a rise up this board. Charles Cross comes in at number 21, another offensive tackle. Just as many corners, I think there might be just as many offensive tackles. Cross is somebody that's high on just about everybody's offensive tackle rankings. Polished, plays in a Power 5 school, very strong, naturally, another kind of like what we talked about Karloftis, just a brute of a human being. So worthy of being in the top 21. Treylon Burks, Drake London, put them back to back. They're both big body slots who make a lot of contested catches. And I'm not naturally somebody who gravitates towards wide receivers like that. I am more someone who likes Chris Alave, who creates separation for himself and has that burst. But Burks is a good athlete, and same can be said about London. And you know what? They win enough as those 6'3", 6'2" slot wide receivers picking on, typically smaller nickel corners. Will that carry as much in the NFL? I'm not entirely sure, because I think the NFL is paying attention to the nickel a whole lot more than what it is at the college ranks. But these guys are fantastic talents, and they put up some good numbers so far, and that's hard to ignore. Brandon Joseph, there's a lot of safeties in this class too. We'll talk about another one a little bit with Jordan Battle. Brandon Joseph coming from Northwestern. Joseph is as good a safety as there is. If it weren't for Kyle Hamilton being, Derwin James 2.0 in a lot of ways, then Joseph easily safety 1. And it's impressive. He plays a position that is largely becoming less and less valuable in the eyes of football fans and NFL teams alike, but Joseph is worthy of being in the top 24, and we'll talk about Jordan Battle here in a second. Joseph can just do it all, and he will provide value no matter what role you put him in, so therefore he has to be towards the top of this big board. On to number 25, Carson Strong. Might be a little high for a lot of people. I've met QB4. This guy's arm is unbelievable. His build is what you want in an NFL quarterback, or at least traditionally speaking, as of the last half decade or so, it's been more acceptable to be 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", like Zach Wilson going number 2 overall. Would have been unheard of 10, 15 years ago or more. But I really like what Carson Strong can be. I think he can be this year's Zach Wilson, small school guy that climbs up the board. Again, unreal arm. It helps that he plays in a weaker conference, not Power 5, spread offense. The stats will look good, but he's also a guy who racks it up in regards to efficiency, limits turnover plays, big turnovers against him, I should say. So I'm a big fan of Carson Strong, and you weigh in the QB position value there, that moves him up a little bit as well. Drake Jackson, Kingsley Enagbare, guys who look like NFL pass rushes than they belong. Drake Jackson, I think, would be a little bit more versatile between 4.3, 3.4 than Enagbare, but these two guys also have combined for 0 sacks so far this college football season, when I last checked the day of me recording this. So that's something that you're going to want to see change throughout this college football season. You need that production on top of looking the part. And I think these guys are both going to be, athletically speaking, test well at the NFL Combine, assuming that there is one. And I think these guys would be benefited by having an NFL Combine. So just need to see the production start to pile in, and these guys will start to move up the board for sure. Jordan Battle, not quite as athletically gifted as Kyle Hamilton or Brandon Joseph. He's not going to run as good of a 40. 3-cone might be in the neighborhood, but probably a tick less. But kind of like Xavier McKinney, where he might not be the quickest player, the fastest guy, greatest athlete. This man just knows the game, and he's so smart, and it allows him to cheat where he might not have the step on players like Kyle Hamilton or Brandon Joseph, to allude to them again. He just always puts himself in the right position to where he can take smart angles and just put his nose to the football, because he, film study or just naturally knowing the game, whatever the case may be. He produces results because of his football IQ as opposed to relying on athleticism, and that has a ton of value in its own right. Nick Menino at 29, great hands and sneaky quick. This is a guy who, when it comes to defensive ends, specifically in a 4-3, this guy on a stunt coming towards the interior of the offensive line, this man's got some mean burst behind that first step. So I'm a big fan of Nick Benito, and the more I watch, the more I really want him to be a first-round caliber edge rusher. I'm a big fan of his game. He's just fun to watch play the game, and especially that edge rush position. And maybe part of it's like I'm tired of seeing Oklahoma just have an awesome offense and a terrible defense. But I think this year with Nick Benito being a legit edge one and a guy who can create havoc against opposing offenses, Oklahoma has a shot to be dangerous this year. They're going to need better play at Rattler and some more consistency across both sides of the ball. But big fan of Nick Benito. If you get the chance to turn on the tape and you're going to watch the Oklahoma defense, Benito's a good reason why. Ahmad Gardner, good size and awesome physicality. Another one of those corners that checks a ton of boxes and just looks like what modern NFL corners, or what NFL teams want out of modern corners. 6 foot plus, right weights, and he's looked awesome at Cincinnati. The only thing that you would hold against him is, well, Cincinnati's group of 5 versus power 5, so not always matched up against elite cornerbacks, and because of that, that's why he's a little bit lower on the list than honestly his production would suggest. But definitely a guy who's just he's late first round, early second round, he's a steal at that spot. But because of how deep the cornerback class is, that might be where he's going as of right now. Nakobe Dean at number 31 stole the show in that Georgia-Clemson game. I mean, he was an effective pass rusher from that inside linebacker spot, and he's such a good athlete. He's all over the field, sideline to sideline, easy. Like, you hear that phrase all the time with linebacker. You can play sideline to sideline. Nakobe Dean, he makes it look like it's the back of his hand. It is ridiculous how good of an athlete this guy is. And it's also crazy to think about. He basically replaced Monty Rice midway through or the latter half of last year. Monty Rice was a third-round pick in last year's NFL draft. And Dean replaced him as a freshman, sophomore, young underclassman. That's impressive. So definitely starting to enjoy what I've seen from Nakobe Dean. And, he's done it on a big stage. If he keeps it up, yeah, he'll be coming up from 31 for sure. Maj Sanders, another Cincinnati Bearcat on the list. He's a guy who has all the physical tools, and because of that, naturally will garner a lot of attention. But the production hasn't quite been there yet. Kind of the same like of Drake Jackson and Kingsley Enikbare. But those two guys have done it in years prior. Sanders hasn't dominated the group of five quite like I think a lot of people want him to. This could be the year that turns it all around. But he also feels like a guy who could come from small school, continue his development into the NFL, and by year 3 or so of his rookie contract, he busts onto the scene and becomes one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. He has the arm length, very strong guy, good burst, good speed. He is what you want in a defensive end starter kit, right? Now we just need to see him produce and rack up sacks, hurries, pressures, everything of the like. Akem Ekwonu, right now playing tackle for NC State, but this guy has the makings of a mean run blocking guard at the NFL level. So because of that, he has an easy pathway to being a successful NFL player. So he comes in at number 33. Like to see the position change made eventually, but if he can play tackle at the ACC, that's impressive in its own right. He does need to get better as a pass protector, so being moved out to tackle will certainly allow him to get the reps necessary to improve in that area. Zach Harrison, coming from Ohio State, that edge rush position has just been producing NFL studs left and right. Obviously, the Bosa's, Chase Young. Harrison's not quite as good as those guys, but he'll have the opportunity to carry that on his back on top of playing in a lot of big games, being in the national spotlight. I know Ohio State just lost to Oregon. That kind of hurts his case and hurts Ohio State overall as a team just in general. But if he can string together some big games in some big moments where a lot of people are watching, he'll definitely climb up boards, partially because of the Ohio State, but I think he's just a good player. He's just not quite as athletically gifted in my eyes as the others, but still have to, work through my tape on Zach Harrison. So don't jump on me too early on if you think he should be higher up on this list. There's also just a good edge class in regards, or at least in comparison to last year, where there's a lot of guys I think can make an impact right away at the NFL level, versus last year in the draft, we talked about a lot of good athletes, but not quite refined. I think it's not quite the opposite, but there's definitely more polished pass rushers in this year's draft class. Darion Kendrick, transfer from Clemson over to Georgia, athletically gifted, has had good production, maybe struggles a little bit with flags, but it's tough to find a knock on this guy. And now he's done it between the ACC, now playing in the SEC. That's pretty impressive. You don't see a whole lot of guys being able to hold their own in both those regards. And he's playing for maybe the best defense in the country. I mean, Georgia is loaded first-round talent at all three levels, so that bodes well for him. And it could ultimately be something that holds him back, right? You play with a great defense, great pass rush in front of you, makes your job a little bit easier. But at that point, that's beyond nitpicking. I mean, that is just finding the smallest thing and trying to find a difference. But in this good of a cornerback class, that's kind of what you have to do. Isaiah Spiller, he's my RB1. Good size, good burst, like his power. There's not much more to it. I think he can improve as a pass catcher as well. But coming in at number 36, I think that's a right spot for him. Jalen Weidermeier right now, my tight end 1. He just looks like a wide receiver that's big enough to play tight end. And that's, ultimately, if I were to build an NFL team, that's what I'd want in the position. So Weidermeier fits the build for what I like. I wish Michael Mayer was eligible for this class, because in a lot of ways, I think week 1 against Florida State kind of highlighted he has the ability to be this year's or new age Kyle Pitts of sorts, where he's this tight end, but he's basically a wide receiver. Weidermeier has some similar skill sets there, given his size and athletic ability, but Michael Mayer, watch out for my 2023 big board. That guy will definitely be towards the top of it. Zion Nelson at number 38, tight end turned tackle. rushed to start by Miami his freshman year, and it was a train wreck, but he is exponentially better. And that's part of my intrigue and interest with Nelson is he's gotten so much better over the last 2 years. How much more growth is left for Zion Nelson? He's still learning the position. Like I said, came to Miami as a 6'8" tight end. So he's been playing tackle for 2 years now. So obviously, I think he has a lot more room to grow, but super strong, great feet, right? Like he knows how to match and mirror the edge opposite of him really well. And part of that's because of that tight end pass catcher background. Very good athlete, very strong at that point as well. 6'8", obviously, that's great. So still think there's some areas where Nelson needs to improve. A lot of his hands, he can get caught leaning as well. Learning the situations and modernizing his technique and his sets to fit more of what the NFL wants, that would help as well. But definitely a big year for him at Miami. And he's a project no matter where he gets taken or who takes him, but he's a really interesting prospect. And given the upside, I think he has to be on my big board, at least in this 1.0 version. A couple of wide receivers to round out today's video. Romeo Doubs, Justin Ross. They do it in two different ways. Doubs feels like this year's Dyami Brown for me, where I just love watching his tape. He's 6'2", Dyami Brown 6'1", so right around the same height, but that big play, downfield threat, big moment waiting to happen type of guy like Dyami Brown. And both those guys play in very college-like offenses. A lot of go balls and posts with UNC and Brown, and Doubs plays in the spread offense in a not Power 5 conference. So he has a lot of favorable mismatches, but he is just beyond fun to watch play the position. And him and Carson Strong have a really nice connection. I like watching those two play. So Doubs kind of feels like this year's Dyami Brown for me. And then Justin Ross, need to see him do something other than win 50-50 balls, but 6'4" and very physical, wants to take on a corner one-on-one. He wins a lot of 50-50 contested catches, and he's really impressive there. And he does it from the outside versus the slot like London and Burks, so that's an interesting dichotomy between those two different types of big body contested catch wide receivers. But Ross needs to be able to separate better, needs to win in something other than back shoulder catches and taking on a cornerback one-on-one and just using his 6'4" height. Because once you get to the NFL, you may be bigger than dudes, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to be as big of a factor as it is picking on lesser talented cornerbacks at the college level. There's just a huge difference between the NFL and college football cornerback play, unless you're talking about top end, which this class you heard a lot of cornerback talk. But that's going to do it for my 2022 Big Board 1.0. Tell me what you think down in the comment section. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Where am I wrong in my takes? Whose film should I go back and revisit? Who did I leave off and should be on my 2.0 version? Love to have your thoughts. So let's talk about this big board down in the comment section. Hopefully you all enjoyed. And if you did, please hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel and want more football and draft coverage content in your life, just hit that big red subscribe button. That's going to do it for today's video. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.